Hi, everyone. Welcome to Riot's virtual Lunch and Learn series. I am Caroline Griffin. I lead events and operations for the Riot organization, and we are very thankful to have you here today. I am super excited to introduce Bryce Gartner. He is principal for Cherry Bekaert. Cherry Bekaert has been a longtime sponsor and supporter of Riot, so we're very thankful to have Bryce here with us today. Just a couple reminders before we get started. This presentation will be recorded and posted to Riot's YouTube channel and then shared broadly on the meetup page where you registered for this event. Also, if you have any questions throughout Bryce's presentation, please do either put those in the group chat, or Bryce has also offered, if you are comfortable with it, please feel free to unmute and ask the question out loud on the platform. But whatever makes you most comfortable, I will also be monitoring the chat box. But without further ado, I know you are all here to see Bryce. So Bryce, I'll let you take it away. Thanks for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk about this topic and to get started. So thank you all for joining today. First off, a lot of people come to these conversations and they're like, well, what has this guy got for me? What does he bring to the table? I think what the why me component of this is, I bring in an interesting perspective to how I think about analytics. The way that I think about it and think about data is I've been both a CIO and a chief marketing officer. And so when I look at where data and analytics and how all of this can play in, I bring kind of a balance of technical and the go-to-market and marketing and business side. And then I spent 10 years really focusing on helping companies leverage their data and really starting to understand this whole concept of more data is a better thing. I joke a lot about the whole big data wave and how the big data wave came and went and now it just is, and how people are thinking about how they put new technology, including all the Internet of Things providers of data that are there, as well as how we put a lot of that to use. Besides the things I do for Cherry Bekaert as the head of analytics and business intelligence in our advisory practice, that spilled out of our company being acquired last February by Cherry Bekaert. As they get more focused on digital transformation, and as we really spin up our digital practice, focused on how we help people in this age of digitization, but specifically leveraging data and the analytics and the latest and greatest things. I also, in addition to what I do for Cherry Bekaert, I am an adjunct professor at the Fuqua Graduate School of Business at Duke. I teach data visualization and analytics there. I have a great group of students. It should make all of you excited that there are a fantastic opportunity pool of candidates that are coming into the market that in that program, they never cease to amaze me how talented and how quick the students are to take data and really drive critical thinking about questions. Fun fact about me is I've had 6 startups. I've been a part of 6 startups where I've either been a co-founder or a single-digit employee, and right now my record is 4-2. I'm not planning on any new startups in the near future, so hopefully I'm going to keep that winning record as we go forward. So what we're going to talk about today is how we take a lot of what matters to you all, and we really think about this concept of leveraging analytics. And when I think about leveraging analytics, I'm thinking about leveraging analytics for operations. If it's manufacturing, leveraging operations for operations and supply chain. But how do we take advantage of this? So the way that I think about this is I always try to break things down. I try and take things to the simplest form. And when I take it to the simplest form, I jokingly, with a lot of the people that I work with a lot of companies I've worked with, they look at me kind of sideways because they're like, you're dissecting sentences. And I'm like, yeah, if we dissect sentences when we're thinking about the data that we have available to us, and we're thinking about the questions we have, it leads us towards the pathway of what we need. So when we think about the topic today, leveraging analytics for operations, I really want us to think about how important, each of those elements are. And so when we're wanting to leverage something, we're wanting to take advantage of all the resources and all the capabilities we have so we can do more than what we could do just thinking about it by ourselves. And then the analytics side, there's such an amorphous feeling out there about analytics, and figuring out how we leverage those tools and those capabilities and the data that we have is really where we can strike up our best solutions. So somebody sent a question of what kind of startups was I involved in. So I was involved in startups that were about in the credit card space, the electronic payment space, in media, advertising, and entertainment. And I was also in the analytics space in a startup most recently. And so it's kind of been across the board in different areas. Thanks for the question, by the way. So as we think about leveraging, we need to also understand the groundwork that we're living in. Right now, we have this limited view of where we can currently leverage information and data and analytics. Too many organizations are still limited by not getting analytics distributed to everybody that needs to use them. And when we think about that, what we're trying to do is to get to the process of team members who understand, instead of thinking this is the right thing to do, they have the data in front of them to know what they do. And when we think about all the possibilities of where data is coming from, we really need to think about how we empower our teams, how we leverage all of this data that's flowing in from so many different sources. We're also going to talk about some sources in a minute that we don't always think about. But how we empower our teams with that is a big part of leveraging what we do with analytics. We also have to think about leveraging analytics because we now live in a world where disruption takes a lot of forms. We are all, over the last 9 months, really understanding the impact of one form of disruption. McKinsey, bringing this to, highlighting this in a recent study that they released in August, really talks about how this heightened awareness of all possible forms of, through the pandemic, has raised awareness around, hey, we should be paying attention to other potential forms of disruption. And when we think about disruption, we don't just think about traditional manufacturing and having people on a manufacturing floor, but we also have to think about all the ancillary pieces around it in transportation and other areas, and how do we manage data? And that's where, as we really get farther and farther into the capabilities of what Industry 4.0 and IoT brings us from end to end in the chain of activities, we really get this unique opportunity to start to incorporate some of these thoughts into our analytics, and not expecting them to happen, but understanding there's always a possibility of them to happen. I think the other part that often gets overlooked really comes in this concept of even companies that weren't thinking they had a big data play when big data was the buzzword, right? We've moved from buzzwords about big data to buzzwords like machine learning and artificial intelligence, which we're going to talk about today as well. But we also have to remember that this is starting to impact businesses of all shapes and sizes. And as we think about that, people have to think about this volume of data And the volume of data does nothing without us thinking about what we're going to do with it, how we're going to analyze it. Collecting data for the sake of saying, hey, we have the data doesn't do us any good. It's like a bundle of energy that's just sitting there in a static way. We've got to make it active. And so, but to give you a feel for scope, I was at a meeting with the analytics lead at Ford Motor Company. And they were talking about how they had to change their organization to really think about the difference in data and the size of data, not the infrastructure to support it, not the technology that drove it, but how they're going to get their hands and head around this massive explosion. Now this, I specifically didn't put the date sequence in here, but this is their expectation over 3 years, mostly with the introduction of sensors in so many different areas that are now reporting data, whether it's autonomous vehicle reporting back, whether it's just sensors in vehicles reporting back, whether it's items from the manufacturing floor reporting back. They really had to reinvent themselves around leveraging analytics to take advantage of all the data that they were adding to the pool of data, and in so many new areas. How are they going to approach attacking that? And they had a massive shift in how they looked at data. They went from having isolated analysts and data scientists spread throughout the organization to a more consolidated, aligned, and collaborative group of analysts that they quadrupled in size over a 3-year period. Because they knew as this wave of data started moving forward that they were going to have to be in front of it to make the most of it. When we talk about analytics, it's always good to get everybody on the same page. And so Gartner, unfortunately, no relation to me, not one of the startups that I had, Gartner has always talked about analytics in ascendancy, where as our value of our analytics increase, so does the degree of difficulty. It's kind of like that gymnastics thing on the floor, or as the Olympics always roll around, the figure skating degree of difficulty no one understands. But ultimately, these two things interplay, and we move up through this concept of the analytics ascendancy. And we talk about the things we do most, which is the descriptive, what happened, reporting, some analytics on what's going on, where it's happening, getting a little deeper into diagnostic and why did it happen, driving through what's gonna happen, and then more importantly, how can we make something happen with prescriptive? Well, one of the things that I don't like about this model, and so of course I had to take a shot at changing it a little, is I didn't like how the ascendancy assumed that once we get to the top, we never go back to the beginning, right? It makes us feel like, hey, if we're working our way up to prescriptive analytics, that we've reached the pinnacle and we don't have to think about the previous levels. I think it's really important to know that as data grows, as data evolves, as data changes, as situations change, as the environment changes, as our economic climate and our just business climate with all the things that impact it change, we have to think about how we look at analytics continually using all items of the spectrum, not landing just on prescriptive and thinking we've climbed the mountain, but we always want to go back and look at what happened and why it happened and what we think is going to happen, not just trying to prescribe what we should do about it. And so we still have the degree of value and difficulty in play, but we've always got to remember it takes all the components to be effective, to really leverage analytics the way we want. I think the other thing that is really changing in the analytics is when we think about operations and we think about the chain of what's going on in business and all the different places, where we're getting input of data, we have traditionally thought about these data points and data coming in, whether it's in our vendors providing the materials we need or the supplies we need, depending on the industry. And we're going to talk about that because I look at that very differently. Or whether we're talking about, just building or storing and the shipping and logistics to ultimately getting it to the customer. Well, what's really been turned on its head, and it's just been magnified by the pandemic, is really this concept of we're thinking differently, working left to right. What's really top of mind right now is, did I get the product, whether that's to an end consumer, it's to another business. Did I get the end consumer what they needed when they needed it, and were they satisfied? And so we start thinking our way backwards through the data chain to start to identify when our end result is where we're starting, getting it there. What do we need and what data elements do we need all the way back through the chain to ensure the most success happens on that delivery to our end customer? Regardless of whether we're delivering to a home, to the end consumer, or whether we're delivering to a business that's needing what we're supplying to do their business. And I think that's the component where if we start to think differently and we work our way back, then we can start to really dig into what our process is and what are some of the key things, some of the key steps involved in how to leverage analytics, thinking about working our way through. And so one of the places that I always recommend that we start is thinking about the critical questions. To me, these are the driver of all analytics. So let me give you a little insight into what you're about to see in the next. I really hate death by PowerPoint. But in these next slides, what I want to try and share with you is really the process that we've seen be successful inside organizations and how they make the most of this ever-changing and ever-growing data, and how they identify areas where they have gaps in data and they find ways to get more of it, whether that means automation and adding things or adding different elements to their operations to make sure that data is collected. And then I'm going to give you an example. Side by side with each of these, we're going to talk about some examples, how people approached each one of these elements. So as we think about this, critical questions are what drives the business. What's going to make a difference? Now, when we ask critical questions, it's this nice lofty goal of let's ask critical questions that support our vision of our business. Just like it says up there, vision, mission statement, our values, all of that. Well, a lot of people look at that as blah, 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 right? I start sounding like the teacher or any adult in a Peanuts cartoon. But what I want you to think about is vision differently. Vision is really, and the critical questions tie to what is our preferred future, right? A vision statement can be lofty and out there, but it underlying that vision statement is what we ultimately want our preferred future to be. So if we identify our questions surrounding our preferred future, what ultimately do we want to occur? And what's good about this is an organizational vision is one way we look at it, but we can get down to departmental visions. We can get down to a much deeper level. And when all we're trying to do is simplify it down to what is our preferred future, then we can set the objectives of our questions to evaluate the goals that we're trying to get to our preferred future. Or we can also dig into what I call messing with our organizational mythology. In every organization, because of a lack of data or the lack of the use of data, we end up with organizational mythology. It's not much different than Greek mythology or any other mythology, in that it exists because it has been passed down from generation to generation within an organization. The problem with organizational mythology is it doesn't always take years to build a mythology and to pass it along. It can happen really quickly. And so if we're asking critical questions, we can prove a theory or we can disprove a myth around that mythology. As we think about these critical questions, I'm going to give you an example. A global auto parts manufacturer, they had a theory, but they had no idea about the why. They felt like their gross margin was being suppressed. Now, this is a global auto parts manufacturer that has 5 product lines, roughly 20,000 SKUs per product line. They wanted to dig in and do a better job of demand planning, warehouse management, getting sales into distribution. But because they had so many individual products, they felt like they didn't have a good way to understand what was going on. And they had a big data problem with small data tools and with small questions, because they felt like they were having suppression in their gross margin, but they needed to really look at what was going on across every SKU in every group. And so by looking at what might matter, they discovered that looking at a deeper level of granularity, looking at their core goals, what they found was, and pulling data from a lot of different sources inside the organization, in different parts of the ERP, in different parts of their CRM, different elements, what they found was that they had a lot of products on a very simple view that was sales over inventory turn. Over time, by SKU, they discovered they had a huge amount of products that they were not turning. And the bad news for those ones that they were turning, they were trying to move units. And ultimately, it was having a $48 million impact to their margin. Now, by stopping and asking some critical questions, they drove a huge impact to what was happening. They started gathering more data and figuring out where those challenges came from, because they started then asking even more critical questions that dove deeper into this bigger vision impact. And so being able to do that, I feel like what that lets happen is that lets organizations start to understand that if we get to our critical questions, then we're going to get to evolve through those analytics. The second part of what we see often is the data elements. Now, I talked about the auto parts manufacturer before, and they started looking at ERP data. They started looking at some CRM and sales data to really get at the channel. But we a lot of times stop short thinking about just the data that we have in front of us. Even if we're enabling our manufacturing floor with IoT, and we're thinking about how we add even more to our distribution and logistics and our warehousing and all of that, we tend to still think very finite around those pieces of data that we have control. A lot of times where we've seen organizations, as they think more broadly, as they try and leverage analytics, and they try and leverage 2 ways. They try to leverage out and down. And what I mean by that is leveraging out means we start thinking about other data that has an impact back to our critical questions on impacting our core goals and our objectives, and what's going to impact our preferred future. we then start thinking about those, and that's leveraging out. And then what we have to do is, now that we can leverage out and think about other impacts, now we want to leverage down, so we get this down to everyone in the organization who's trying to make a decision that can be impacted by those internal and external factors. And too many times we don't think about some of the things that are out there just readily available, right? So things that are readily available are changing in regulations. A big impact that we've seen through COVID is changing government mandates over the period of time of the pandemic. All of those are available. We've had clients, we put together a solution internally that kept track of all of the information, all states, based on what the current restrictions were in every state. A big impacting thing is weather that costs us nothing. There are all sorts of sources for free weather information. One of the biggest changes we saw in one of the organizations we work with is they started pulling in historical weather, tracking that to performance relative to the number of clients they were dealing with on a daily basis. They were a consumer face-to-face organization, and then using that and using the forecast to kind of predict what traffic would look like, what floor traffic would look like. And then also putting pressure on those people around us that have an impact on our preferred future to provide us, at least at a minimum, some of the data we need to make better decisions. When put into practice, this can make a huge impact. So there's an online auction company that focuses, not like eBay, but they focus themselves on selling high-end heavy equipment, construction, agriculture, all of those things. Their big focus was to accelerate growth. They have terabytes of internal data based on what's happening with viewers of products, bidders, buyers, sellers. And they started really digging into what's happening with all of that internal data. And that got them so far. When they also started thinking about what else happens, what else is going on? Well, they started to identify some of the critical questions that could feed other data they needed to pull in. One, they could look at financing trends of new and used equipment in other venues, because that information was available, was publicly available through a service. Weather has a huge impact on agricultural and construction, on the moving of equipment as people move it back and forth to different areas. They also recognize that in their world of construction, that home starts were a leading indicator. And so understanding in different areas that they were having sellers who were selling equipment and people buying equipment, what that looked like. And so not just thinking about what they have, but thinking about what other data is out there is a big part of what made them successful. They have spent, after putting all this data together, they've spent 7 years on Inc.'s fastest growing companies and seen 20x growth from where they were when they started working with data and thinking about external data. It completely helped them support their preferred future, which was to become the primary driver and auction destination for people in those categories. The other thing that we can't overlook is the impact of technology and what this means. You all are so deeply ingrained in cutting edge and bleeding edge technology based on what you do and what you're involved with. The challenge for a lot of organizations is figuring out how to take that data, all of the data that is now becoming available, and do something with it. Understanding that you've got to do more than Excel. Excel is a fabulous thing. I have a whole slide deck on the fact that Excel came out in 1984 and it was for the Mac platform only. And it was designed to replace accounting worksheets. that you used to handwrite. There are all of these new technologies that enable so much more rich analysis. They deliver an ecosystem that lets you do integration of data from multiple sources, that allow for preparation, that allow for visualization, that allow you to now do spatial analytics and advanced statistical analysis at such a pace that we can keep up with the amount of data that's flowing in. Thinking about how these technologies get put into place, now we can take all of the information that's getting fed in, and we can think about a transportation company that's providing emergency services to a big part, as you can see on the map, of Canada, that they wanted to increase capacity and improve efficiency and create value. Well, to do that, they needed to be able to leverage new technologies that, one, let them optimize routes, and also let them see it visually with a lot of data in a way that would help them make better decisions, would help them understand better their relationships with some of the providers that they work with, and also help show that they were the provider of choice for new clients, because they could share data about what the impact was, how that impact worked, and where it flowed. As we think about data, we can't talk about it without thinking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. The vast amounts of data that are getting provided to organizations who are trying to do analytics at a very high pace, who are wanting to use it the most, we have to think about how we use this effectively. We know AI and ML are buzzwords. We know they're buzzwords because anytime in a major sporting event, when IBM is advertising about it, a topic that most people aren't able to get below the very top level, we know that it's become a buzzword. That's my measurement for buzzwords. And so as we think about AI and ML, we look at those about finding opportunities. And all of this stacks on top of one another. So when we think about critical questions, and we think about getting data elements from multiple sources, and then we drive that through some of the technologies that we're capable of using now, what we're thinking about is how we design models to pull in all of this data, to think about those outside components, to narrow the spread of predicted outcomes. Well, the reason that this is important, and to build models that we can learn from and processes that are made up of multiple models, the best visualization of this, and all of us that are on the East Coast know, we see the spaghetti models on all the hurricanes. The spaghetti models aren't just taking into account the variables and the information about the current hurricane. It's taking into account weather from all around the globe, how that's going to have an impact on the pathway. It's also taking into account all of the data from historical storms of similar shape, size, timing, and other weather patterns that were around it to help us predict and prescribe solutions, which results in the spaghetti models. And now the spaghetti models used to be a lot more spread. Like if we thought about those spaghetti models 8 years ago, when our data wasn't as solid, we didn't have as many sensors providing feedback as we do today. We didn't have as much history being captured as we do today. If we remember those spaghetti models, we didn't have as many bunched up in the middle. They were kind of all spread all over the place, depending on what variables people played into them. And so as we think about what the data brings to us and how we start to refine AI and ML into what we do, that's really where this stuff starts to fit in. The example I'm going to use here is really simple. If we think about pharmaceutical sales and a company who really wanted to expand their pickup by physicians, they really needed to understand what was going on in the marketplace. They needed to understand what was happening with their sales teams in the field, what was happening relative to the overall selling environment. And they wanted to get themselves in the mode of how, by understanding how we can do more and how we can get our clients and doctors and locations to do more across our product line and do more with our product. Now, what they started to do was start to model, including things like competitive products coming onto the market, expiry of patents. They started looking at trend selling by organizational size, by geography. And they started to build a recommendation engine that allows us and allows them to really look at the different impacts that these outside factors have. So there's a question in the question chat about how can we refine? Well, we can refine because the way we refine is by continuing to feed the data in, right? The best way is to just keep getting more data. But another way that we do this ahead of time is to take our models, right? To take the models we're using and let's project out where we think we're going, but then let's project out where we think we should have been, where we already have data, to see how our model plays through the test. There's another note in the chat. Matthew says, I don't know whether it's Matthew or Matt, but all data isn't good data. That is absolutely true. One of the key parts of really getting into AI and ML is to have a good data governance model in place. But I'm also going to say to that, Matt, that a big part of that is to have a process for doing the analytics and identifying the gaps or the failures that you currently have in the process that identifies back to you where you need to improve your data collection or data governance. Sorry, Matthew. It is imperative that you don't wait on your data to be good or great to get started with analytics and start building some of your models. And the reason that I say that is because if we hold off on getting our data perfect, we are going to be holding off forever. Because getting data perfect is very, very hard. And we don't know what isn't perfect or where our process is broken until we start using the data. So I often have watched companies struggle with, is it the chicken or the egg? Do I get my data all fixed before I start doing analytics? And my best recommendation for everybody is don't wait. Understand the gaps in your data as you start to build the analytics and as you start to build models. But don't wait, because if you wait, then you won't make progress, because getting the data at the rate at which data is growing in organizations, it is so hard to get the data perfect before you start using it. And then when you start using it and you push it to the people who know the data the best, they are going to identify the gaps as part of the process. The last and probably most important piece that I'm going to close with is communicating. This is the one we most of the time screw up. And let me just tell you, it's everyone. If you think you as an organization are really bad, you are in good company at communicating data. Too many times we don't think about communicating with data the same way we think about communicating everything else that's important. We have to think about communicating with data like we were doing a 30-second commercial. We have to think about how we engage our audiences and grab their attention. So we get them immersed in what's coming out of the data. It's in a format that's familiar to maybe what they were used to in an offline mode, or what relates back to what the analysis is about. And then we provide the insight. And really the best part of this, and a key to communicating, is you can have the best data scientists in the world. I work with some of the companies that have those. You can have the best piece of analysis that predicts and prescribes exactly what needs to happen. But if it's not demystified, then it's lost. If the people communicating this great analysis are focused on the analysis itself and how great it is that they were able to figure all this out, and here's all the R squared and all the math and all the things that go with it, and all the Python and all the R routines that they ran, then that isn't going to get across to the people who need to use it, because most people aren't comfortable with analytics. Most people aren't comfortable with that process. So we have to make sure that as we're thinking about leveraging analytics, that we're sharing those in a way that gets the point across and provides insights and tells a story about what's happening, and does it in an easy way. And the simplest way I'll say that to you is, I'm guessing everyone on this call has bought something from Amazon at some point in time. Do you care about all the statistical analysis and mathematics that go into the recommended product? Or do you just care that you got a recommended product on either Amazon or Netflix or wherever that does align with what you care about? We have to think about our business analytics that same way. People don't necessarily care. It's important that we know that we got there with good math, that we got there with good thought processes, that we got there with good data and good critical questions. But when it comes time to present to the audience that's making decisions from it, we need to make sure it's done in a way that doesn't intimidate them or make them feel like they don't understand it. So therefore, as soon as they don't understand it, they don't use it. And so when we think about this, I like to tell a visual data story. So as we think about how we work our way through that example I talked about at the very beginning, what do our products look like? How are our products being received in the marketplace? What, in our mythical bicycle company, how do we let all of this tell a really good story? Well, we can take it all the way from how we're doing relative to product reviews in all of our products that are going to market, through our ability to look at forecasting and providing alerts around inventory and sales based on where we're trying to forecast, to the analysis of where and how we're selling these products and how we're taking them to market, getting deeper into the back office of understanding demand planning and forecasting and alerting when we're getting low on elements that we know we're going to have to turn and reorder, down to what is happening on the production floor, where we have machine failures based on information that's flowing, drilling into exactly where that's happening, the frequency that it's happening, and the level of criticality that that's happening, to how it's getting delivered and where product is sitting in any part of the flow. Telling a story gives us the ability of what we need to do and how we need to get there. So I have a question from Ben. But what about the understanding the function of an autonomous vehicle in which I'm entrusting my life. Isn't oversimplification a little dangerous? Yes, and he's reminding me, Tufte, which is a great visualization expert, about oversimplification. Oversimplification is something you have to be wary of, Ben, right? Absolutely. It's what I tell my students. We can't oversimplify, but we have to simplify it down for the audience, okay? And understanding the audience and the degree of sophistication or the degree of importance for the audience is who we're thinking about. No, I don't want to simplify everything down to where it doesn't support what someone needs to know and what is there. But I have to keep it audience focused. I have to keep it on what my audience needs to know and what needs to be communicated to my audience, right? If you think about the example you put up there about the space shuttle disaster, right? The visualization that got simplified down really wasn't a visualization. It was a bunch of numbers where it didn't stand out. A visualization that simplified the message, but actually showed the more complex relationship between the data elements is what made the difference in Tufte's example. And so we have to think about the audience that needs to see it, right? The audience that's going to be receiving and make decisions on the insight. What is their degree of sophistication and what is their degree of need for the information that they have? And that's where it becomes very important. It's not, hey, we're going to make it so simple that my 14-year-old can figure it out, not having any knowledge of what's happening in the business, but making it simplified and in the vernacular or in the way that they expect to see it. So that car visual I showed you a few slides back, that was designed for a group of people who used to use a parts catalog that was very visual in nature. And then they would have to look up the individual SKUs by the parts catalog, and then they would have to type those into a reporting system to get just the sales and the sales report by quarter for that. So they were going to a catalog, looking at the part area, then finding the SKUs that were typed. That simplification didn't oversimplify the data that they were ultimately getting to. What it did was it gave them a more comfortable way that they were already doing to automate what was happening, ensure that there weren't any manual failures in the process by typing in a wrong SKU, by typing in the wrong thing. So as we think about this and we think about some of the takeaways, I want you to think about the 5 things we talked about. All of these things build on one another. They build on the critical questions that lets us find and identify, the key data elements where we can leverage technologies and machine learning, and then making sure we communicate it. So Ben has a follow-up, and then I'll open up for any other questions. So Ben's follow-up is, hold on a minute. Yes, all of you who can see it in the chat, the answer is yes. You know, statistics is something lots of people didn't want to take in school. A lot of people don't have this understanding. So that's why it's incumbent on us that do analytics, on those people in organizations that are doing analytics, that we help understand, we help communicate as part of our communication that we've done the evaluation to make the math solid, and the results that you're seeing are supported by all those things that you didn't want to have to study when you were required in college to take statistics, and you just did it, got through it, and then moved on to the rest of what mattered to you, right? Those are the things that are really important. Those are the things that are very valuable. Matthew asked the question, do I mentor? I have about 173 students that I work with at Duke that have continued to reach out to me after they were students at Duke. And so, yeah, I work with a lot of different people. Happy to help people as they have questions. Happy to talk to people. I have a very extensive group of connections on LinkedIn that I reach out to on my side, that I look to ask for questions from, and I'm always happy to answer questions from people that are trying to figure out their pathways going down the visualization analytics and trying to figure out how to put it all together. So absolutely happy to talk to anybody at any time with any follow-ups. Caroline, I want to say thank you to everybody who attended, and thank you for having me today. If we have any more questions, happy to take them. I've got a few minutes left, I know.
That was really great, Bryce. Thank you so much. Great presentation, and loving the feedback in the group chat. So we do have a few more minutes. As Bryce said, if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself. If you feel more comfortable, please put those in the group chat and we'll make sure they get answered. Long one just came in. Do you want me to read that out loud, Bryce? Or?
No, I got it. I think everybody can see it, right? So
they can, yeah.
Yeah, I don't, so a couple of things for Ben there. I think, the data gap is widening, right? I would agree. I would agree with some of what Ben is saying. What I don't necessarily agree with is that as the data gap widens, that anybody has a greater advantage. The auction company I used as an example was a startup and a tiny player in the space. And they've grown to be a leading player in the space because of how they attacked data. They didn't have a tremendous amount of extra resources available to do it. They just dedicated, and they saw it as a competitive differentiator for themselves that has helped them get to where they wanted to go, to their preferred future, because they put the emphasis on that. And so I think, I really think it's less about, obviously the largest enterprise companies have a huge advantage of the number of people that they can engage in working on this. But at the same time, I'm watching lots and lots of smaller organizations take advantage of the fact that the tools and the other things make it easy to do and fairly low cost. Mary, so is there a good place to look at COVID data that shows how it's spreading? So yeah, I mean, you have a lot of the things that the CDC has done, but one of the things that I will tell you, and I'm not trying to do a shameless plug for Cherry Bekaert, but we have, and we made it available to our clients for free. And I think we've made it available to some other people. We, at the very beginning of the COVID crisis, I think we made it available the last week of March. We started pulling together and putting in a database that we provided access if people just want access to the data, and then we provided it in an analytical tool as well. If they needed to start from an analytical tool, we've made it available where we're aggregating all of the Johns Hopkins data, all of those government restrictions, data elements that we talked about. So if you want to reach out, my email is right there. Mary, I'm happy to give you, get you connected with the people at Cherry Bekaert that, on my team, that have the ability to get that information, get you access to that information where it's already aggregated. Additionally, they also know about some other sources that are out there that I know are pulling it in. I know that some of the BI tools, Tableau being one, I think Microsoft also has it, has a publicly available resource that they're updating as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Bryce. And I just did put Bryce's email into the chat so everyone can find it.
Oh, yeah, I forgot I quit sharing my screen. Thank you, Caroline.
You're good. You're good. Another question just came in, Bryce.
So Anthony, yes, blockchain has started to be integrated into some of the data that is getting thought about and analyzed. I am definitely not a blockchain expert. I don't even pretend to be I'm not even the one who pretends that he stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night and knows about blockchain. I know we have clients where it's becoming more and more and more important to them that's a component of what's going into their analytics. But you have reached the depth of my knowledge on blockchain. But I know as we talk about, it's becoming a bigger part. What do they ask about it? Our clients, we just have clients that are, and I am really not qualified to speak on this, but, and I'm happy to get you connected with some people who are much wiser at this than I. My understanding is they're wanting to understand what's happening. They just want to understand everything that's happening in that process. And I am definitely not, the person who even gets into that level of depth. I just know I've heard it bantered about in a couple of meetings where we were doing briefings on what clients were were on their mind and what they were talking about. So beyond that, I'm not the person to ask. All right. Anything else? This has been great.
Thanks again, Bryce.
Yep.
Thanks to everyone who attended, who participated in the group chat. Again, this was recorded, so it'll be posted to Wright's YouTube channel, Meetup channel. And I encourage you to reach out to Bryce and the Cherry Bekaert team if you have additional questions. Thanks so much, Bryce. We appreciate you being here today. Take care.
Absolutely. Thank you again all for having me. I appreciate it. And hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone.